It's midnight and you are tuning into Nightline with me, Liyana Hassanel. The headlines. Government unveils expanded 2022 budget to spur post-pandemic recovery. Good morning. Despite the limited fiscal space, ongoing global uncertainties and COVID-19 resurgence risks, the government is setting aside yet another record high budget worth 332.1 billion ringgit for next year. As a government which emphasizes the people's well-being, the allocation for the Health Ministry is the second largest after the Education Ministry. The Education Ministry received 52.6 billion ringgit, while the Health Ministry got 32.4 billion ringgit. When tabling the budget in the Dewan Rakyat on Friday afternoon, Finance Minister Datuk Seri Tengku Zafrul Abdul Aziz said the nation's focus for next year is to strengthen recovery, build resilience and drive innovation. This was reflected in the increase of 9.6 billion ringgit for 2022, compared with the 322.5 billion ringgit allocated for 2021. The budget's amount, equivalent to 20.3% of the gross domestic product, GDP, is nearly 3% larger than the 322.5 billion ringgit announced for the previous budget. Tengku Zafrul said this, however, can be implemented based on an estimated increase in government revenue for 2022 to 234 billion ringgit.
Bajet 2022 yang dijajarkan kepada rancangan Malaysia ke-12 telah diadun sebagai kesinambungan daripada pakej bantuan dan rangsangan ekonomi sebelum ini. Juga ditambah baik dan dilengkapi usaha baru untuk membentuk sebuah bajet yang inklusif, mampan dan seimbang. Mengambil kira aspirasi, impian dan keperluan ahli keluarga Malaysia, di samping jangkaan peningkatan hasil kerajaan bagi tahun 2022 kepada 234 bilion ringgit, kerajaan akan terus menyediakan bajet yang mengembang.
Of the budget allocation, 70.3% is for operating expenditure, followed by 22.8% for development expenditure, and the balance of 6.9% is for the COVID-19 fund. There is also a provision of 2 billion ringgit as contingency reserve. The three main areas of focus of the 2022 budget are the Rakyat's well-being, competitive businesses, and prosperous and sustainable economy. Datuk Seri Tengku Zafrul also said that the fiscal deficit for 2022 is projected to shrink to 6.0% of GDP from 6.5% in 2021. Now, ministers have lauded the announcement on the federal budget as it shows that the government has placed emphasis on the social healthcare, educational and security agenda, aside from the post-pandemic economic recovery efforts for the well-being of the people.
Usaha untuk kita terus memperkasakan pendidikan khas ini akan dilaksanakan oleh KPM bagi memastikan murid-murid anak-anak istimewa ini dapat terus belajar dalam persekitaran yang selamat dan kondusif. Selain daripada itu, kita mengucapkan jutaan terima kasih kepada kerajaan di atas peruntukan yang diberikan kepada guru-guru dalam konteks bantuan one-off untuk alat bantuan mengajar sebanyak RM100 bagi setiap orang guru.
Bukan satu bajet yang memberi keyakinan kepada rakyat. Kalau kita lihat selama 2 tahun ini segala peruntukan telah pun fokus lebih kepada memerangi COVID-19 dan sebagainya. Tetapi kali ini harapan rakyat begitu tinggi sangat supaya kita ke arah pemulihan. Dan setelah mendengar pengumuman ataupun bajet yang telah dibacakan oleh Yang Perdana Menteri Kewangan, telah memberi jaminan kepada warga kerja khususnya golongan belia di mana 600,000 peluang pekerjaan akan dilahirkan.
Tanpa program community drumming ini sudah tentunya memang barang-barang keperluan itu jauh mahal kerana diambil kira kos pengangkutan. Ini dikatakan program community drumming yang sangat memberi bantuan kepada mereka yang berpendapatan rendah dan duduk di kampung-kampung di luar bandar dan juga di rumah-rumah panjang di Sarawak dan di pulau-pulau banyak di Sabah.
Tahun ini pertumbuhan 3 ke 4%, tahun depan 5.5 hingga 6.5%. Tapi dalam konteks defisit fiskal, umpamanya tahun lalu ialah 6.2, tahun ini 6.5, tahun depan 6.0 defisit fiskal. Maknanya keadaan kewangan mencabar, mampu untuk menyediakan bajet yang cukup besar.
Under the 2022 budget, the government will continue provision of financial assistance to targeted groups of people which have been adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It also unveiled several measures to ensure the people's welfare is taken care of, as well as introduced various initiatives to stimulate the economy. Datuk Seri Tengku Zafrul in his speech said the government will introduce a new direct cash aid for low-income households known as Bantuan Keluarga Malaysia (BKM), where eligible recipients will receive RM2,000. This would apply to households with 3 or more children earning less than RM2,500 a month, while single mothers and fathers earning RM5,000 monthly and the elderly will receive RM500 and RM300 respectively.
Secara keseluruhan, BKM akan memanfaatkan lebih 9.6 juta penerima dengan peruntukan RM8.2 bilion, iaitu peningkatan berbanding dengan 8.6 juta penerima dengan peruntukan RM7 bilion di bawah BPR.
On assistance channeled by the Social Welfare Department, he said the welfare eligibility requirement would be increased in accordance with the 2019 food poverty line level of RM1,169 instead of the previous RM980. He also said that over 440,000 households are eligible for welfare assistance with RM2.4 billion in total. The government will also set up a RM25 million fund under the Yayasan Keluarga Malaysia to provide care for some 4,700 children orphaned after their parents succumbed to COVID-19 to safeguard their welfare and education. 600,000 university students from B40 families will also receive 1 tablet each, involving an allocation of RM450 million under the Peranti Siswa Keluarga Malaysia initiative. The amount of assistance provided under the government's social protection initiatives will also be increased, including expanding MySalam, a special medical insurance scheme for B40 group, to BKM recipients, while medical device cost claim benefits will be extended to the dependents of eligible MySalam recipients. The Federation of Malaysian Consumers Associations, FAMCA, welcomed the ministry's commitment to help Malaysians who are suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic by providing social security net for various groups of people. Its Chief Executive Officer, Saravanan Thambiraja, when commenting on the 2022 budget, also hoped that it would ensure jobless Malaysians can find employment, aside from increasing the people's purchasing power as well as spurring the country's economic recovery.
We can see this budget is very uplifting and is empowering the people. Basically, of course, this budget also gives positive impact on Malaysian cost of living and thus will help nations to recover from this pandemic. As what the minister said, about 750,000 people are suffering. Of course, they lost their job. And with the budget plan for 2022, we can see we are on the recovery plan.
FAMCA also lauded the decision to increase the budget for the healthcare sector, as this will help the frontliners tackle the COVID-19 pandemic more effectively. He also said that the government's RM70 million allocation to address mental health issues is also significant, as the public have gone through so much during the pandemic. Meanwhile, FAMCA also urged the government to speed up the rollout of 5G and fibre connectivity in the country, soon to boost productivity in the country. The government needs to provide a detailed explanation for the introduction of a one-off corporate tax, known as the Prosperity Tax, under the 2022 budget. Former Second Finance Minister Datuk Seri Johari Abdul Ghani said this was important because it could affect the nation's reputation as an investment hub, especially to multinational and foreign companies.
Mana-mana syarikat yang untung lebih daripada 100 juta, dia dah kena 24%. Tapi yang lebih daripada 100 tu, dia akan tax 33%. Yang ini kena explain balik kepada investor yang ada dalam negara kita, supaya saya tak nak mereka ingat bahawa kita change the goalpost, because 24% yang kita tax ini sudah merupakan salah satu daripada corporate tax yang agak tinggi di dalam ASEAN region.
Commenting further on the 2022 budget, Datuk Seri Johari also urged the government to put in place strict procedures to prevent leakages and wastage of public funds when managing their finances and spending.
Definitely we can mitigate this. The most important thing, we need every ministry, every agency must be responsible for every money that they spend. And procedures, standard procedures of accountant negara has to be strictly followed. Then we need to have a proper audit team, a key management to make sure every time money is spent for public use, standard procedures must be obeyed.
Still ahead, 700 ringgit special aid for 1.3 million civil servants under 2022 budget. This story and more coming up next. The public service sector was not left out in the tabling of the 2022 budget by the Finance Minister. Datuk Seri Tengku Zafrul said that a total of 1.3 million civil servants of grade 56 and below will receive a one-off special financial assistance of 700 ringgit as a token of appreciation for their contributions in public service delivery throughout the year. According to the minister, 1 million government pensioners will also receive a special financial assistance of 350 ringgit. This assistance will involve an allocation totaling 1.3 billion ringgit. Apart from that, the cash award in lieu of leave, GCR, will also be increased to 160 days from the current 150 days in appreciation of the sacrifices made by civil servants, especially the frontliners who had been working tirelessly without taking leave during the pandemic. To help reduce the country's unemployment rate to 4%, Datuk Seri Tengku Zafrul said the government plans to create 600,000 job opportunities next year under the Jamin Kerja Keluarga Malaysia Job Guarantee Initiative, involving an allocation of 4.8 billion ringgit. The government will also allocate 30 million ringgit to widen social security net via Aisaraan initiative for workers in the informal sector under the 2022 budget, which will benefit 100,000 individuals. The budget also proposed incentives to encourage employers to provide employment opportunities to specific groups such as people with disabilities, the Orang Asli and ex-prisoners, as well as encourage women to return to work, besides providing tax relief to attend training and improve skills. Datuk Seri Tengku Zafrul also announced that the government will provide 80 million ringgit through the Employees Provident Fund, EPF, and Social Security Organisation, SOCSO, to benefit housewives and widows. Meanwhile, to encourage Malaysians to own a home, the government will continue implementing housing projects, especially for the low-income earners, with a total allocation of 1.5 billion ringgit. To help those without fixed incomes, such as gig workers, micro-entrepreneurs and farmers, to buy a house, government will allocate 2 billion ringgit to help provide them with access to financing under the Housing Credit Guarantee Scheme starting next year. The government also will no longer impose the real property gains tax for property disposals by individual citizens, permanent residents, and other companies starting from the 6th year and above. Budget 2022 also allocates over 31 billion ringgit for subsidies, aid and incentives to minimize the impact of the rising cost of living by means of control of the prices of goods and services. When tabling the 2022 budget, the Finance Minister announced that the government intended to introduce the Fiscal Responsibility Act next year, aimed at improving governance, accountability and transparency in the country's fiscal management. The move is seen as an effective measure to ensure fiscal sustainability and support macroeconomic stability.
So this is quite critical for the long term. Especially in respect to how the government finances will be managed. So if successful, this act will act as a mechanism whereby the financial management of the government will be done in a manner that is very transparent and in a very disciplined manner. Therefore, the fiscal consolidation process can be executed in a timely manner. So in that regards, if this can be done, I think it should reduce the risk of a sovereign rating downgrade, because it essentially tells you that the government is committed to ensure that the deficits at the debt level continue to remain within an acceptable level. Beyond that,
the 2022 budget is set to pave the way for more opportunities for jobs and businesses. Bank Islam Chief Economist Dr. Muhammad Afzanizam Abdul Rashid said that the government appeared to be committed that the recovery process will continue to happen in a manner that is sustainable at a time when the global recovery is expected to improve.
The expected growth next year is likely to be higher, which is about 5.5% to 6.5% in 2022, from an estimated 3 to 4% this year. So what it tells us is that year 2022 is supposed to be a year of recovery, and therefore it should be able to create more jobs. It should be able to create more opportunities for businesses. So with the right execution rate, I think this plan can be achieved and be able to benefit all Malaysians from all walks of life.
Up next, 5 million ringgit allocation for Student Welfare Fund. The details when we return. Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob on Friday launched the Yayasan Kebajikan Siswa Keluarga Malaysia with a RM5 million startup fund, which will take on the role of assisting undergraduates in need. The Prime Minister said the foundation will collaborate with all existing aid channels and foundations in higher learning institutions to facilitate distribution of aid to students who need assistance.
Amat mustahak bagi setiap mahasiswa melihat rakan-rakan sebagai sebuah keluarga besar yang saling memerlukan. Sehubungan itu, dengan tertubuhnya yayasan ini, tergalaslah amanah di bahu Majlis Perwakilan Pelajar atau MPP khususnya dan di setiap mahasiswa amnya bagi memastikan tiada sebarang rakan yang memerlukan tercicir daripada dibantu.
Datuk Seri Ismail also said the establishment of the foundation was proof of the government's concern for the welfare of students, as contained in Keluarga Malaysia's concept of inclusiveness, togetherness and gratitude. He said this during the virtual launch of the foundation on the Higher Education Ministry's official Facebook page. Elaborating further on the foundation, the Prime Minister said Yayasan Kebajikan Siswa Keluarga Malaysia, which has the status of an official body at the national level, is established under Act 258 and is regulated by the Legal Affairs Division of the Prime Minister's Department. Previously, the government had introduced several aid packages for undergraduates throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. These include the B40 Data Plan Aid, the B40 Device Targeted Aid, Moratorium on National Higher Education Fund Corporation, PTPTN loans, and the e-Tunai contribution.
The 2022 budget, short-term needs and long-term financial sustainability, decisions to bolster growth. Continuity of aid, rebuilding fiscal resilience. Driving socio-economic recovery activities and the country's latest economic growth forecast. MIR Head of Research Dr. Shankaran Nambiar speaks with Money Matters this Saturday at 5 p.m. only on TV3.
Government will go ahead with the procurement of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for the immunization of children aged 5 to 12. Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin said this in a posting on his Twitter account on Friday after the US Food and Drug Administration, FDA's advisory panel, gave its endorsement for the vaccine to be given to children in the age group. He also said that the ministry will look at other options, such as the Sinovac vaccine for the immunization for 5 to 12-year-olds. As of Friday, over 1.95 million, or 62% of adolescents in Malaysia, have been fully vaccinated, while another 640,598, or 20.4%, have received the first dose of the vaccine. Meanwhile, in a separate tweet, Khairi said a decision on COVID-19 booster shots for recipients of the AstraZeneca vaccine will also be made soon. This will be offered to individuals who have allergies and cannot take the mRNA vaccines as their booster shots. Schools with COVID-19 vaccination rates exceeding 90% will be allowed to operate without the need for students to attend classes on a rotational basis. The Education Ministry announced that this was applicable to all students who will sit for public as well as international examinations and will begin on November 8th. In a statement on Friday, the Education Ministry said students who will return without the need to rotate are those sitting for Sijil Pelajaran Malaysia (SPM), Sijil Vocational Malaysia (SVM), Sijil Tinggi Agama Malaysia (STAM), and Sijil Tinggi Persekolahan Malaysia (STPM). The ruling also applies for IGCSE O-Level, A-Level, Australia Higher School Certificate, and IBD, as well as other international examination candidates. Schools which are yet to reach the 90% vaccination mark will maintain the rotational attendance of students. However, pre-university semester 3 students at Sekolah Sukan Malaysia, public examination students from boarding schools, and candidates sitting for international examinations will have to continue attending school sessions without rotation. The ministry also listed out schools yet to reach the 90% vaccination mark and will continue to update every Wednesday. The schools which have been delisted will be able to resume next Sunday or Monday. The statement added for Johor, Kedah, Kelantan and Terengganu, the session will also resume on November 8th instead of November 7th, as the later date is an additional public holiday for Deepavali. The ministry also suggests the educational institutions, which are not under the ministry, to follow the fixed guidelines. Coming up, first civilian politician to be jailed by Myanmar junta. We'll be right back. To the foreign front. Myanmar's military junta on Friday sentenced a close aide of ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi to 20 years in prison for treason. According to his lawyer, U Win Tin was sentenced to 20 years imprisonment under Section 124A by a special court, adding that they would appeal. The former Member of Parliament is the first high-ranking member of Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy to be sentenced by the junta after a trial. The 80-year-old is a long-time political prisoner who has spent long stretches of time in and out of detention for campaigning against military rule. Considered Suu Kyi's right-hand man, he has long been sought out by international and domestic media for insights into what Myanmar's de facto leader is thinking. Ahead of his arrest 3 days after the coup, he told local media the military putsch was not wise and that its leaders have taken the country in the wrong direction. Beijing's airports cancelled hundreds of flights on Friday as travel rules were tightened across China to tackle virus clusters as the capital gears up to host the Winter Olympics. Previously, the world's most populous nation has reduced infection numbers to a trickle since its initial epidemic last spring. Thanks to a zero-tolerance approach of border closures, targeted lockdowns and long quarantine periods. But China is now grappling with flare-ups in a dozen regions linked to tourists, spurring officials to order millions to stay home, restrict inter-provincial travel, and ramp up testing. Case numbers remain far lower than in most countries, with 48 new domestic infections on Friday, bringing the tally to less than 250 in the past week. But authorities are not taking any chances, with tens of thousands of people in Beijing, which will host the Winter Olympics in February, under lockdown after a handful of cases were detected. Moving on to sports. Al Jazeera Club defeated Banias 2-0 at the Mohammed bin Zayed Stadium as part of the 8th round of the ADNOC Professional League. Ali Makboud opened the scoring for Al Jazeera in the 45th minute before Abdoulaye Diaby doubled the tally in the 64th minute. With the victory, Al Jazeera moved to 16 points in second place in the table, while Banias remained 12th place. the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism unveiled one of the largest mosaic panels in the world, following a multi-year restoration project at Hisham's Palace in the West Bank city of Jericho. The mosaic dates back more than 1,000 years and wraps up Nightline this time around. With that, I'm Liyana Hassanel. Thanks for watching and take care, Malaysia.